It was a chilly evening in downtown Chicago, where the streets were alive with the hum of traffic and the glow of neon lights reflecting off glass buildings. Laura Carter stood outside one of the city's most upscale restaurants, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the strap of her purse. Beside her, her father, Henry Carter, shifted uncomfortably in his worn but clean jacket. They had come here to celebrate, a rare treat for both of them, but now they felt out of place, like two puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit into this polished picture. Laura had spent months preparing for this moment. She worked part-time at a coffee shop near her college campus, balancing late-night shifts with early morning classes. Her father, Henry, worked even harder. As a janitor for a large office building, he spent his nights mopping floors and emptying trash bins while everyone else slept. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills, and more importantly, it allowed him to support Laura's dreams. And today, those dreams had finally started coming true. Earlier that afternoon, Laura received an email confirming she'd been awarded a full academic scholarship to finish her degree. It was the news they'd both been waiting for, the kind of breakthrough that made all their sacrifices feel worthwhile. "This calls for something special," Laura had told her dad earlier that day. "Let's go somewhere nice tonight, just you and me." Henry had hesitated at first. Nice usually meant expensive, and neither of them had much money to spare. But when Laura insisted, saying they deserved to celebrate after everything they'd been through, Henry couldn't say no. He wanted to see his daughter happy, especially on a day like this. So together, they picked out their best outfits. Laura wore a simple navy blue dress, and Henry donned a tie he hadn't touched in years and headed downtown. The restaurant they chose was called the Grandview. Its name alone sounded impressive, and its reputation matched. Known for its exquisite cuisine and elegant atmosphere, it attracted wealthy patrons from across the city. Laura had seen pictures of the place online: the sparkling chandeliers, the crisp white tablecloths, the waiters gliding silently between tables, and imagined what it would be like to dine there. For once, she thought, they could pretend to belong in a world far removed from their own. But reality hit them hard the moment they stepped inside. A young woman greeted them at the entrance, her smile polite but distant. "Good evening," she said, glancing briefly at Laura and then at Henry. "Do you have a reservation?" Laura shook her head. "No, we don't. But is there any chance we could get a table? We're just looking to have dinner." The hostess paused, her eyes scanning their appearance. Laura noticed how her gaze lingered on Henry's scuffed shoes and the slight fraying at the edges of his jacket. Then she turned her attention to Laura's modest dress and plain flats. Without missing a beat, the hostess replied, "I'm sorry, but we have a strict dress code policy here. Perhaps another time?" Her tone was courteous, but the message was clear. They weren't welcome. Laura felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment as she glanced at her father. Henry's jaw tightened, though he tried to hide his discomfort. "We understand," he said quietly, placing a hand on Laura's shoulder. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go." They turned and walked back toward the door, the sound of clinking glasses and laughter fading behind them. Outside, the cool air stung Laura's face, but it wasn't enough to mask the sting of rejection. She stopped on the sidewalk, staring blankly at the ground. "Dad," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. This was supposed to be our night." Henry sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "Don't apologize, Laura. None of this is your fault. These kinds of places, they're not meant for people like us. That's just how it is." "But why does it have to be like that?" Laura asked, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "We work just as hard as anyone else. Why should we feel ashamed because we can't afford fancy clothes or expensive meals? It's not fair." Henry didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked around at the bustling street, watching as couples dressed in designer suits and gowns climbed out of luxury cars and disappeared into the restaurant. There was a sadness in his eyes, but also a quiet resignation. "Life isn't always fair, sweetheart," he said finally. "But that doesn't mean we stop trying. You've already proven that tonight. You got that scholarship. That's something nobody can take away from you." Laura nodded, blinking back tears. She knew her father was right, but it didn't make the situation any easier to swallow. For a brief moment, she had dared to imagine herself stepping into a different world, one where she wasn't judged by what she wore or how much money she had. Now, standing on the sidewalk in the shadow of the Grandview, that dream felt farther away than ever. Just as they were about to leave, a soft voice interrupted their thoughts. "Excuse me, are you all right?" Laura turned to see a woman approaching them. She was tall and elegant, with silver-streaked hair styled neatly and a tailored coat draped over her shoulders. Her presence commanded attention, yet there was a warmth in her expression that put Laura at ease. "Yes, we're fine," Henry replied quickly, though his tone betrayed his unease. "Thank you for asking." The woman tilted her head, studying them curiously. "You look like you might need a friend right now. My name is Catherine. May I ask what happened?" For a moment, Laura hesitated. She didn't want to burden a stranger with their problems, but something about Catherine's demeanor made her feel safe. Taking a deep breath, she explained their situation, the celebration, the rejection, and the disappointment that followed. As she spoke, Catherine listened intently, her brow furrowing with concern. When Laura finished, Catherine placed a gentle hand on her arm. "I'm so sorry that happened to you," she said sincerely. "That restaurant doesn't know what they're missing, but tell me, would you and your father like to join me for dinner instead?" Laura blinked in surprise. "Join you? Are you sure?" "Of course," Catherine replied with a reassuring smile. "It would be my pleasure. Besides, I think we could all use a little kindness tonight, don't you?" Henry glanced at Laura, unsure of what to say. Accepting such an offer felt strange, almost too good to be true. But Catherine's sincerity was undeniable, and after a moment's hesitation, they agreed. Together, the three of them walked back toward the restaurant, leaving behind the weight of rejection and stepping into a new chapter neither Laura nor Henry could have anticipated. As they stepped back into the restaurant, Laura couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. The grand chandeliers sparkled above them, casting soft light over the polished floors and elegant tables. Waiters moved gracefully between guests, carrying trays of steaming dishes and crystal glasses filled with wine. It was beautiful, yes, but it also felt intimidating. She glanced at her father, who walked beside her with his head held high despite the earlier rejection. Then there was Catherine, calm and composed, leading the way like she owned the place. Catherine spoke briefly to the hostess, who seemed surprised but nodded respectfully. Within moments, they were escorted to a quiet corner table near a large window overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking. Lights twinkling in the distance, cars moving like tiny dots on the streets below. For a moment, Laura forgot about their earlier embarrassment and simply took it all in. Once seated, Catherine leaned forward slightly, her smile warm and inviting. "I hope you don't mind me intruding," she said, "but I couldn't just walk away after seeing what happened. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect." Laura shook her head quickly. "We're grateful, really. This is more than we expected." Henry nodded in agreement, though he remained quieter than usual. He wasn't used to being in such luxurious surroundings, let alone sharing a meal with someone as refined as Catherine. Still, he appreciated her kindness and made an effort to relax. Catherine waved off their thanks with a small laugh. "Nonsense. Life is too short to let moments like this pass by. Now tell me about yourselves. What brings you here tonight?" Laura hesitated for a second before answering. She didn't want to sound boastful or overly dramatic, but something about Catherine's genuine curiosity encouraged her to open up. "Well," she began, "today I found out I got a scholarship to finish my degree. It's something I've been working toward for years, so Dad and I wanted to celebrate. We thought coming here would make the night extra special." "That's wonderful news," Catherine exclaimed, her eyes lighting up with admiration. "Congratulations, Laura. And to you too, Henry, for raising such an incredible daughter." Henry chuckled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I can't take all the credit. Laura's always been determined. She works harder than anyone I know." Laura blushed at the compliment, glancing down at her hands. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted. "Between school and work, there are days when I wonder if it's worth it." But then I think about how proud my dad is and I keep going. Catherine listened intently, nodding as Laura spoke. When the waitress arrived to take their orders, she suggested they try some of the restaurant's specialties. Laura and Henry exchanged nervous glances. They weren't accustomed to ordering expensive meals. But Catherine insisted. "Tonight is about celebrating," she reminded them. "Let's enjoy ourselves." As they waited for their food, the conversation continued. Catherine asked about Laura's studies and future plans. Laura explained that she wanted to become a teacher, specifically one who worked with underprivileged students. "I've seen firsthand how hard it is to grow up without much support," she said. "If I can help even one student realize their potential, it'll be worth it." Catherine smiled warmly. "That's a noble goal. The world needs more people like you." Henry chimed in, sharing stories from his own life. He talked about growing up poor in a small town, struggling to find steady work, and eventually settling into his role as a janitor. "It's not glamorous," he admitted, "but it pays the bills. And knowing I'm helping Laura chase her dreams makes it all worthwhile." Catherine listened with rapt attention, her expression thoughtful. "You should both be very proud of yourselves," she said. "Not everyone has the strength to persevere through tough times. You've clearly built something remarkable together." The food arrived soon after, a feast of savory dishes that smelled incredible. There was roasted chicken, creamy pasta, fresh salads, and warm bread rolls. Laura and Henry had never tasted anything quite like it. Each bite was better than the last, and they couldn't help but marvel at the flavors. Catherine watched them, with amusement, pleased to see them enjoying themselves. Between bites, the conversation turned to Catherine's life. She shared bits and pieces of her story, explaining how she'd grown up in a modest household similar to theirs. Her parents had worked long hours to provide for their family, and she'd taken on odd jobs during high school to save money for college. "I remember feeling like the odds were stacked against me," she said. "But I refused to give up. Sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you to change everything." Laura leaned forward, captivated by her words. "Did someone believe in you?" she asked. Catherine nodded. "Yes, actually. A teacher of mine noticed my potential and encouraged me to apply for scholarships. Without her guidance, I might not have pursued my education further. That's why I try to pay it forward whenever I can." Her story resonated deeply with Laura and Henry. They understood what it meant to have someone believe in you even when the world seemed determined to push you down. For Laura, that person had always been her father. And now, sitting across from Catherine, she realized how much impact kindness could have on someone's life. By the time dessert arrived, a decadent chocolate cake topped with fresh berries, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. What had started as an awkward encounter outside the restaurant had transformed into a genuine connection. Laura and Henry no longer felt out of place. Instead, they felt welcomed and valued. Catherine's presence had bridged the gap between their worlds, proving that wealth and status didn't define a person's worth. As they finished their meal, Catherine raised her glass of water in a toast. "To new beginnings," she said with a smile, "and to people who remind us that kindness matters more than anything else." Laura and Henry clinked their glasses against hers, feeling a sense of gratitude they hadn't experienced in a long time. Little did they know, this evening was only the beginning of something much bigger, a ripple effect of generosity and hope that would change their lives forever. The dessert plates had been cleared away, but the warmth of the evening lingered. Laura sat back in her chair, feeling a mix of fullness, not just from the rich chocolate cake, but from the conversation that had unfolded over the past hour. Catherine's words still echoed in her mind, each one painting a picture of possibility and hope. For the first time in a long while, Laura felt seen, not as the daughter of a janitor or a struggling college student, but as someone with dreams, worth pursuing. Catherine leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the table. Her expression was thoughtful, almost like she was carefully choosing her next words. "Laura," she began, her tone soft yet deliberate, "I have to say I'm truly impressed by everything you've shared tonight. Your determination, your goals, they remind me so much of myself when I was younger. Laura smiled shyly, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to receiving such praise, especially from someone as accomplished as Catherine. "Thank you," she said finally. "That means a lot coming from you." Catherine nodded, her gaze steady. "It's not just flattery. I mean, it. You've already overcome so much, and I can tell you're going to achieve great things. But I also know how hard it is to balance work, school, and life without support. It's exhausting, isn't it?" Laura hesitated before nodding. "Yes, it is. Some days it feels like no matter how hard I try, there's always something else pulling me back. Bills to pay, shifts at the coffee shop, assignments due. Sometimes it feels like I'm running in circles." Henry, who had been quietly observing the exchange, chimed in. "She works herself to the bone," he said, his voice filled with pride but also concern. "I keep telling her to slow down, but she won't listen. She's stubborn like that." Catherine laughed softly. "Stubbornness isn't always a bad thing. In fact, it's often what keeps us moving forward when everything else feels impossible." She paused, then added, "But even the strongest people need help sometimes, and there's no shame in accepting it." Laura looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the napkin in her lap. The idea of accepting help from someone else made her uncomfortable. She'd spent most of her life relying only on herself and her father. Asking for assistance felt like admitting defeat, like she wasn't capable of handling things on her own. Sensing her hesitation, Catherine reached across the table and placed a gentle hand over Laura's. "Let me ask you something," she said. "If someone offered you a ladder to climb out of a deep hole, would you refuse it because you were afraid of looking weak? Or would you take it, knowing it could get you closer to where you want to be?" The analogy struck a chord with Laura. She thought about all the late nights spent studying while fighting off exhaustion, the days when she skipped meals to save money, the constant juggling act between responsibilities. Wasn't she already climbing out of a hole? And if someone was offering her a way to make the journey easier, why should she turn it down? Before Laura could respond, Catherine continued. "I'd like to offer you that ladder," she said firmly. "Not out of pity, but because I believe in you. I want to fund your education, tuition, books, living expenses, everything. That way you can focus entirely on your studies and becoming the teacher you're meant to be." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Laura stared at Catherine, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. Beside her, Henry froze, his eyes wide with shock. Neither of them had expected this turn of conversation. "Catherine," Laura began, her voice trembling. I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous, but..." "No buts," Catherine interrupted gently. "This isn't charity. Think of it as an investment in your future, in the students you'll inspire, in the difference you'll make. You've earned this, Laura. Every bit of it." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes, and she quickly blinked them away. She glanced at her father, searching for guidance. Henry looked equally overwhelmed, his weathered face reflecting a mixture of gratitude and awe. "We couldn't possibly accept something like this," Henry said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "It's too much. We'd never be able to repay you." Catherine shook her head, her smile unwavering. "You misunderstand. This isn't about repayment. It's about paying it forward. Someone once helped me when I needed it most, and now I'm in a position to do the same for others. If you feel compelled to give back someday, pass the kindness along. That's all the thanks I need." Laura wiped her eyes with the edge of her napkin, trying to process everything Catherine had said. The weight of her struggles, the financial stress, the sleepless nights, the constant worry, suddenly felt lighter, like a burden she might finally be able to set down. But accepting such generosity still felt daunting. "What if I disappoint you?" Laura asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I fail?" Catherine's expression softened. "Failure isn't the end, Laura. It's part of the journey. What matters is how you respond to it. Besides, I have faith in you. You've already proven that you're resilient, determined, and kind. all qualities that will carry you far. Her words settled over Laura like a comforting blanket. For years she'd carried the fear of failure alone, convinced that any misstep would reflect poorly on her and her father. Hearing Catherine speak with such confidence gave her a sense of peace she hadn't realized she needed. Henry reached over and squeezed Laura's hand. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "this is a gift. A rare one. Don't let fear hold you back from accepting it." Laura took a deep breath, letting the reality of the moment sink in. Slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you, Catherine. More than I can ever express." Catherine beamed, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're welcome, Laura. This is just the beginning for you. I can't wait to see everything you'll accomplish." As the evening drew to a close, they lingered at the table for a while longer, talking about plans for the future. Catherine promised to connect Laura with advisors who could guide her through the next steps of her education. She also encouraged Laura to dream bigger, to imagine not just finishing her degree but excelling in her field and making a lasting impact. When they finally stepped outside the restaurant, the city seemed quieter than before. The air was cool against their skin, and the streets were less crowded. As they stood under the glow of the streetlights, Catherine pulled out her phone and exchanged numbers with Laura and Henry. "Stay in touch," she urged. "We'll talk soon." Laura hugged Catherine tightly, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "Thank you again," she murmured. "For everything." Catherine returned the hug warmly. "Take care of yourself, Laura, and remember, you've got this." As Catherine walked away, disappearing into the night, Laura turned to her father. They exchanged a long look, both of them processing the enormity of what had just happened. For so long, they'd carried the weight of their struggles alone. Now, for the first time, they felt like they weren't carrying it anymore. On the drive home, Laura stared out the window, watching the city lights blur together. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more exciting than the last. She thought about the students she would teach, the lives she would touch, the legacy she hoped to leave behind, and she thought about Catherine, whose unexpected kindness had changed everything. When they arrived home, Laura climbed the stairs to her small apartment, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She opened her laptop and stared at the blank document on her screen. Without hesitation, she began typing, a letter to Catherine, pouring her heart into every word. Tonight hadn't just been about celebrating a scholarship. It had been about finding hope, connection, and the courage to believe in herself. And as Laura wrote, she knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would lead her farther than she'd ever imagined. Years had passed since that unforgettable evening at the Grandview. Laura Carter was no longer the young woman who juggled late-night shifts and early morning classes. She had graduated top of her class, earning a degree in education with honors. Now she stood in front of a classroom filled with eager students, ready to begin another day of teaching. Her journey had been long and challenging, but every step had brought her closer to her dream. The school where Laura worked was located in a neighborhood similar to the one she grew up in. Many of her students came from families struggling to make ends meet, just as she and her father once had. Some lived in cramped apartments, others relied on free lunches provided by the school, and a few even helped their parents work odd jobs after school. Despite their hardships, they all shared something in common, a hunger for knowledge and a desire to create better lives for themselves. Laura understood them because she had been in their shoes. She remembered what it felt like to sit in a classroom, wondering if anyone noticed how hard she was trying. She knew the frustration of wanting more but feeling trapped by circumstances beyond her control. That's why she made it her mission to be the teacher she wished she'd had growing up, one who saw potential in every student, no matter how small or hidden it might seem. Her father, Henry, still worked as a janitor, though now he took pride in knowing his daughter was making a difference. He often visited Laura's school during his lunch breaks, bringing her snacks or simply sitting quietly in the back of her classroom while she taught. Occasionally, he'd strike up conversations with her students, sharing stories about his own childhood and encouraging them to keep pushing forward. To the kids, Henry became a kind of grandfather figure, someone who listened without judgment and believed in their abilities. Laura's life had changed dramatically thanks to Catherine's generosity, but she never forgot where she came from. Every milestone she reached, the first time she received a thank you note from a student, the day she was named Teacher of the Year at her school, the moment she earned her master's degree, was celebrated not just for herself, but for everyone who had helped her along the way. And whenever she thought about Catherine, her heart swelled with gratitude. One afternoon, as Laura packed up her things after class, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and smiled when she saw Catherine's name flash across it. They had stayed in touch over the years, exchanging emails and occasional phone calls, but this was the first time Catherine had reached out unexpectedly. "Hello?" Laura answered, her voice bright with excitement. "Laura, how are you?" Catherine's warm tone filled the line, instantly putting Laura at ease. "I'm doing great," Laura replied. "Just finishing up for the day. What about you?" "Oh, you know, keeping busy," Catherine said with a laugh. "But I called because I wanted to hear how things are going with you. It's been too long since we caught up." Laura hesitated for a moment, then decided to share something she'd been thinking about for weeks. "Actually, there's something I've been meaning to tell you," she said. "I've started a scholarship fund for students like me. Kids who have big dreams but need a little help getting there." Catherine's voice softened. "That's wonderful, Laura. I'm so proud of you. It's inspired by you, honestly," Laura admitted. "Your kindness gave me the chance to succeed, and I want to do the same for others. So far, we've been able to support 5 students, and I hope to grow the program even more." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment Laura worried she'd said too much. But then Catherine spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much that means to me," she said. "When I helped you, I hoped you'd find a way to pay it forward. Hearing that you're doing exactly that, it's the greatest gift I could ask for." Tears welled up in Laura's eyes as she listened. "I'll never be able to thank you enough for what you did for me," she said softly. "But I promise I'll keep working to make sure your kindness reaches as many people as possible." Catherine chuckled gently. "You already have, Laura, you already have." They talked for a while longer, catching up on life and sharing stories. By the time they hung up, Laura felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would still be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But she also knew she wasn't alone. She had her father, her students, and the countless people who had supported her along the way. Later that evening, Laura sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers and notes. She was planning the next phase of her scholarship fund, brainstorming ways to raise more money and reach more students. As she worked, her thoughts drifted back to that night at the Grandview. So much had changed since then, yet the memory remained vivid in her mind. She thought about how nervous she'd been walking into the restaurant, how humiliated she'd felt being turned away, and how Catherine's simple act of kindness had transformed everything. It wasn't just the financial support that had made a difference. It was the belief Catherine had shown in her, the reminder that she mattered and that her dreams were worth pursuing. Laura realized now that Catherine hadn't just given her a ladder to climb out of a difficult situation. She had planted a seed of hope, resilience, and compassion that had grown into something far greater than either of them could have imagined. And now, Laura was planting seeds of her own, nurturing the next generation of dreamers and doers. As she flipped through the pages of applications for her scholarship fund, Laura couldn't help but smile. Each one told a story of struggle and determination, of young people fighting against the odds to build brighter futures. She read about a girl who worked 2 part-time jobs to help her single mother pay rent, a boy who dreamed of becoming an engineer despite having no role models in his community, and a teenager who spent weekends volunteering at a local shelter because she wanted to give back. These were the students Laura wanted to help, the ones who reminded her of herself. She knew firsthand how much a little support could mean, how it could light a spark that refused to fade. And she was determined to ensure that no one else would have to face rejection or feel unworthy because of their circumstances. The following week, Laura organized a small ceremony to announce the winners of her scholarship fund. She invited her father, her closest friends, and of course, Catherine. When the day arrived, the room buzzed with excitement as students and their families gathered to celebrate. Laura stood at the front, her heart swelling with pride as she handed out awards and shared words of encouragement. "You are all capable of achieving incredible things," she told them. "Don't let anyone or anything convince you otherwise. Believe in yourselves, work hard, and never stop dreaming. And remember, when you succeed, pass the kindness along. That's how we change the world." After the ceremony, Laura found Catherine standing near the refreshment table, chatting with some of the students' parents. When Catherine saw Laura approaching, she opened her arms for a hug. "You've done such amazing work here," Catherine said, her eyes shining with pride. "I'm so glad I got to witness it." Laura hugged her tightly, overwhelmed with emotion. "None of this would have been possible without you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." Catherine smiled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Believing in you was easy, Laura. You've always had greatness within you. All I did was give you the space to let it shine." As the evening wound down, Laura watched her father laughing with some of the students, Catherine chatting animatedly with a group of parents, and the scholarship recipients posing for photos with their certificates. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to fully appreciate how far she'd come and how many lives she had touched along the way. That night, as she lay in bed reflecting on the day's events, Laura felt a deep sense of peace. She knew her journey wasn't over. There were still hills to climb and battles to fight. But she also knew she wasn't climbing alone. Together, with the help of those who believed in her and the students she now believed in, she was building a brighter future, one act of kindness at a time. Years turned into a decade, and Laura's life continued to evolve in ways she could never have predicted. The scholarship fund she had started grew steadily, thanks to donations from friends, family, and even strangers who were inspired by her story. What began as a small initiative to help 5 students blossomed into a statewide program that supported hundreds of young people each year. Laura became a well-known figure in her community, not just as a teacher but as someone who believed fiercely in the power of education to change lives. Her father, Henry, remained her biggest supporter, though age had slowed him down. He retired from his janitorial job after decades of service, spending his days gardening in the backyard or visiting Laura's school to check on his kids, as he affectionately called her students. His presence was a constant source of comfort for Laura, reminding her of where they had come from and how far they had traveled together. Catherine stayed involved in Laura's journey, attending events, offering advice, and cheering her on from afar. Their bond deepened over the years, becoming something akin to family. Catherine often told Laura that watching her succeed was one of the greatest joys of her life, a sentiment Laura returned wholeheartedly. Despite all her achievements, Laura never lost sight of the values instilled in her by her father and reinforced by Catherine's generosity. She worked tirelessly, balancing her teaching career with running the scholarship fund, always putting others first. But there were moments when she paused to reflect on the struggles, the triumphs, and the ripple effect of kindness that had shaped her path. One crisp autumn morning, Laura received an email that stopped her in her tracks. It was from a former student named Marcus, one of the first recipients of her scholarship fund. Marcus had been a shy teenager when Laura met him, struggling to find his place in a world that seemed determined to overlook him. With the help of the scholarship, he had gone on to study engineering at a prestigious university and now worked as a project manager for a renewable energy company. The email read simply, "Mrs. Carter, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to let you know that I've decided to start a program in my community to mentor kids interested in STEM fields. Your belief in me changed everything, and I want to pay it forward. Thank you for showing me what's possible." Laura read the words over and over, tears streaming down her face. This was exactly what she had hoped for when she started the scholarship fund, not just to help students achieve their goals, but to inspire them to lift others up in turn. Marcus wasn't the only one. Over the years, she'd heard similar stories from other recipients, students who became teachers, nurses, entrepreneurs, and advocates, all driven by a desire to make a difference. That evening, Laura sat at her kitchen table surrounded by letters, emails, and photos sent by former students. Each one was a testament to the impact of her work, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark profound change. As she flipped through the pages, she thought about Catherine's words from so many years ago. When you succeed, pass the kindness along. She realized now more than ever how true those words were. The following spring, Laura organized a reunion event for past scholarship recipients. She rented a community center downtown and invited everyone who had benefited from the program along, with their families and mentors. The room buzzed with excitement as old friends reunited and new connections formed. Laura stood at the front looking out at the sea of faces, young and old, diverse yet united by shared experiences. "I can't tell you how proud I am of all of you," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "Each of you has shown incredible resilience, determination, and heart. You've faced challenges, overcome obstacles, and achieved things many people thought were impossible. And now you're using your success to help others. That's what this is all about." She paused, scanning the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others wiped away tears. None of this would have been possible without the support of amazing people. My dad, who taught me the value of hard work. Catherine, whose kindness opened doors I didn't know existed. And all of you, who remind me every day why I do what I do. Together, we're creating a chain reaction of hope and opportunity, and I believe that chain will keep growing stronger with each generation. After her speech, Laura mingled with the attendees, hearing updates about their lives and sharing laughter and hugs. One woman approached her, holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. The woman introduced herself as Elena, another scholarship recipient, and explained that her daughter loved math and science. "She talks about becoming an astronaut," Elena said with a smile. "I told her if anyone can do it, she can. After all, look where your scholarship took me." Laura knelt down to meet the child's curious gaze. "Do you like space?" she asked gently. The girl nodded enthusiastically. "I want to go to Mars." "Well," Laura said, grinning, "maybe someday you'll be the first person to step foot on Mars. Wouldn't that be something?" The girl giggled and Laura stood up, feeling a surge of optimism. These were the moments that fueled her passion, the ones that reminded her why she kept pushing forward, no matter how challenging things got. Later that night, as Laura drove home, she reflected on the evening. The event had been a celebration of progress, but it was also a reminder of how interconnected their lives were. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, created ripples that reached farther than anyone could imagine. Her father's sacrifices, Catherine's generosity, her own efforts, all of it intertwined to form a tapestry of hope and possibility. When she arrived home, she found Henry sitting on the porch, waiting for her. He smiled as she climbed the steps, patting the chair beside him. "How did it go?" he asked. "It was perfect," Laura replied, sinking into the seat. Everyone came together, shared their stories. It felt like magic. Henry chuckled, softly. "You've always had a way of making people feel special, Laura. You get that from your mother." Laura smiled at the mention of her late mother who had passed away when she was young. Though she barely remembered her, she carried pieces of her legacy in everything she did. "Mom would have loved tonight," she said quietly. "She would have been so proud of you." Henry added, his voice thick with emotion. "Just like I am." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the rustle of leaves in the cool night breeze. Finally, Laura spoke again. "Dad, do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if Catherine hadn't stepped in that night? If she hadn't invited us to dinner?" Henry thought for a moment before answering. "Sure, I think about it sometimes. But you know what? I don't think it changes anything. We've always been fighters, you and me. Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe the road would have been harder, but we would have made it. Still." He paused, looking at her fondly. "I'm glad we didn't have to go it alone." Laura nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. Me too, Dad, me too. In the quiet of the night, surrounded by love and memories, Laura felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life hadn't been easy, but it had been rich with lessons, relationships, and opportunities to grow. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and uncertainty, but she also knew she wasn't facing them alone. As the stars twinkled above, Laura closed her eyes and whispered a silent thank you to her father, to Catherine, to the students who inspired her daily, and to the universe for bringing them all together. Somewhere, somehow, their stories were connected, forming a web of kindness that stretched across time and space. And in that moment, Laura understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. Kindness wasn't just an action. It was a cycle. It started with someone willing to extend a hand, continued with those who accepted it graciously, and grew exponentially as they passed it on to others. It was infinite, boundless, and unstoppable, a force capable of transforming lives in ways no one could predict. With that thought, Laura drifted off to sleep, her heart full and her spirit at peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new chances to make a difference. But for now, she rested, knowing she was part of something much bigger than herself.